Hey everybody, Pastor Troy here. Well, I've got a little communication tip for you before my beautiful bride speaks this morning. When she gives you the casserole, just eat it. Don't complain about it. Don't talk about it. Just fork to mouth, eat the casserole, or you might end up like me.
Just so you know, that is not what really happened. If that is what happened, it wouldn't just be one arm. It would be both. Just so you know, Pastor Troy had surgery on his shoulder. They changed the date up on us, but the amazing thing is that when your husband and wife are joined and you are a team, then when one goes down, the other gets to remain in position and the vision still goes forward. So that's what I love about being a team with my husband, is that I get to come and share all the things he probably would not have said today, but I have the microphone. So no, I just want to take a second and welcome all of our campuses that are joining us today. Give it up for Lake Norman campus. We see you guys. We love you. So glad that you are tuning in, Lake Norman. Now we got to give it up for South End. Hey, South End. So great to have you live streaming with us as well. And we got to give it up for Central Campus. And we also can't forget all of those that are live streaming all across the country: Alabama, Colorado, Florida, Georgia, Illinois, North Carolina, Kansas, Louisiana, Minnesota, Montana, New Jersey, New York, Virginia, and West Virginia. Welcome. So great to have you tuning in. We would love for you to stop in and see us anytime you are in town. It would be our honor to meet you. Just hopping back on this train, we've been in this series that we started last week called Relational Idols. Pastor Troy was here last week, and he will be here next week as well. He's just recovering from his surgery, and the truth of the matter is the reason he's having to have shoulder surgery is that something happened with his rotator cuff, but that's what happens when you try to outdo all the 25-year-olds in the church when you're working out with them. So they still get up in the morning and they're not aching and they're fine and they don't have to have shoulder surgery. Anyway, you know my husband's not going to lose no matter what. So we're in this Relational Idols series, and I just want to quickly tell you that if you do not have the Freedom House app, go ahead, download the Freedom House app. Lake Norman, go ahead, download it right now. South End, you as well, download it. What is great about downloading that app is the fact that we have put resources in there for you, counseling resources. We have also put in there for you where you can take a test and find out your attachment style. It is very important for you to understand your attachment style. I'm not going to go into detail about that today because we've covered that last week. You're welcome to go back and watch that message. I encourage you to, because we're going to continue to build on the foundation. Today, we're tearing down relational idols still, and we are understanding what happens about our communication. Communication is important. Now, before I dive into this, let's make sure we understand the scripture that says, "Search me, O God, and know my heart. Test me and know my thoughts, and see if there be any offensive way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting." Here's the thing. It says, search me. It doesn't say, search my spouse, search my fiance. It is search me. So today, we're not going to throw elbows. We're just going to say, God, search me. Search me today, check on what's inside of me, and uncover what needs to be uncovered. Now, let's get through and talk about, last week we talked about the why. Why we do the things we do, and it has to do with our attachment style. This week, we're going to talk about the what. In essence, how does that play out? And most significantly, how does that play out in my communication? It's very important to understand that, because what we don't understand is sometimes we just think communication is the way that we speak to each other. Well, it's not. When we withdraw in relationship, we are also communicating. There are lots of different ways that we communicate, but understand, when there's breakdown in our marriage, we will often say things, well, it wasn't my intention to, or I didn't mean to, and we think that that is an apology, and it's actually not. You see, when you hurt your spouse, there is a difference between explaining intention and apologizing for impact. One of those is rooted in me. The other is about them. In essence, one focuses on, well, I didn't mean to. That is not an apology. When we do that, it actually minimizes the other person's experience, because we make it about us and not what we may have done to cause harm in the relationship. And when we truly open up our heart, we will sincerely apologize. We won't just slap a Band-Aid on it just to keep the conversation going so we can move on to something else. That is a distraction technique. We want to really get down to the root of things and keep the line of communications open. As I said previously, communicating is not just about verbal. As a matter of fact, 93% of our communication is nonverbal. Only 7% is actual verbal. So what we're going to do today when we're tearing down idols, we're going to look at verbal and nonverbal things, because they play a significant role. And we might say, well, I didn't say that. Okay, we might not have said it out of our mouth, but what did our body language look like? What was our eye contact? How did we show up with our energy and our presence in the moment? What was our tone of voice? Ow, that one hurt a little bit. What are the behaviors that we are acting out that are communicating? What are the words that we are saying? All of those things are communicating. And what we don't want to do is we don't want the enemy to use our past wounds, things that have happened to us before, to be used as justification for why we are showing up the way we are today. Our past wounds are not an excuse. So let's dive into some specific relational idols that we want to tear down, because we want to tear down the things that are tearing us apart. And we've got to make sure our communication is on the same page. 2 Corinthians 10:5 says, we tear down speculations and every lofty thing that is raised up against the knowledge of God, and we take every single thought captive to the obedience of Christ. First relational idol is the idol of insecurity. I can't tell you how many relationships, how many marriages that the husband isn't actually leading, but it could be the wife's insecurity leading, or the husband's insecurity that is leading. Insecurity needs to be dismantled. It should not be what is leading our relationship. As a matter of fact, insecurity communicates this. Insecurity says, I feel inadequate. I am afraid of rejection. And when that is something that you constantly feel, it will lead and guide and control every relationship in your world. And we've got to make sure that we dismantle that. Fear will cause us to act out when we are insecure. And really, there's fear at the root of it. Fear of not being enough. Fear of being rejected. And because of that, what happens is we can act out in different ways. And our communication looks like, where are you? How long are you going to be there? When are you coming home? Who are you with? Now, it's different if somebody has given you a cause to be sus. But if they haven't given you a cause to be suspicious, but yet you are still suspicious, that is insecurity leading. It could look like smothering your spouse because you're afraid of being abandoned. It could look like approval addiction, excessive people pleasing. Always want to make sure that people approve of you, that people care about you. Oh, and I will do anything for you to keep giving me attention. I need you to approve of my performance, my behavior. Maybe I'll go online and I'm looking for some likes, and those clicks, man, they mean a whole lot to me. Or maybe I'm really involved in athletics because I want you to see how great I am because it makes me feel good about myself. Our identity comes from the Lord and the Lord alone. And if your boss does not approve of your work at your job, are you still okay? Do you need somebody to constantly tell you, you did a great job, you're good, man, keep at it? If you do, then maybe other people are feeding your security instead of the Lord himself. What can happen is if you fear you aren't enough, you will try and hide who you are, and you won't show up fully in your relationship. You will build emotional walls. You will look for constant reassurance. Now, I can tell you that my husband, when we got married, had emotional walls. What happened to him as a kid, you heard a little bit about it last week, but his father left him on the doorstep, always saying, because he was abandoned at 14 months old. He would say, oh, I'm going to pick you up. I'll be there. Give him a time. He will sit there and sat on those steps waiting hour after hour after hour, people passing by, coming and going. Hey, are you good? Yes, I'm waiting for my dad with his glove and his baseball. His dad never showed up. And when that happens to you as a young kid, what happens is there is some way that we try and cope with what is happening because that's not God's design. And so what it happens is our body tries to help us get through the moment. And what happened with my husband is what he would say is, well, I fear rejection, so I'm going to reject you preemptively. That way, I don't have to feel the hurt. He would literally sit on those steps and he would say, well, I don't care anyway. It doesn't bother me. It doesn't hurt me. I'm fine. But he wasn't fine. There was insecurity underneath of it, thinking, am I not enough for my own father to even show up for me? This insecurity is driven by fear and a deep need for validation, because in our early years, we should have been validated by our parents, but a good chunk of us were not. And that is what we've got to dismantle. Now, this shows up in men and women differently, okay? But understand, it's still there. For example, Moses had insecurity. Here he was, supposed to be a frontline leader, but he's telling God 4 different times how he wasn't the one, to the point where God has to set a bush on fire to get him to listen. That is insecurity talking. You can also think about King Saul. His lineage and his history, he came from the Benjamites, and the Benjamites got in major trouble because they had incest happening in their family, so a lot of them were wiped out. And here he is getting at his coronation. He's hiding because of where he came from. Many of us don't like where we came from, but my God, can he use it? He can use it. Then you have Sarah, who is Abraham's wife. She was infertile, and in that day there was so much emphasis that was put on that that it made her feel less than, to the point where even though God had given her a plan, she convinced her husband to do something different because she felt so insecure and insignificant. Insecurity is communicating, I don't feel good enough. And when we are communicating that, we derail the plans and the future that God has for us and has for our marriage. The second idol we're tearing down today is the idol of escapism. Escapism, using distractions in order to keep myself from feeling uncomfortable emotions, distracting, escaping. You see the prodigal son do that. Ran out, didn't want to acknowledge what he was really feeling inside, so he tried to fill it with all these other things. Jonah did the same thing. We've seen King David do it. When you go through these, you can see them in the Bible, but we can see them playing out in our own lives as well. Do we tend to escape when things get difficult? Well, escapism looks like avoiding. It looks like fear of being vulnerable. It can look like, binge watching TV, constantly on Netflix, constantly going through YouTube, watching video after video. iFunny, watching just hours. You don't even know where hours went because we wasted that time because we were distracting ourselves. It can show up in addiction, alcohol, drugs, pornography. All of these things, it's not about the alcohol, it's not about the drugs, and it's not about the pornography. It is about, I need something to fill this void, and I have a legitimate need, but I am going about filling it in an illegitimate way. So we escape, we run to different things. We're like on the internet, compulsive spending, shopping, gambling, you name it, food. In the South, this is a big one. We call it comfort food for a reason. Give me a bowl of mashed potatoes and gravy and I'll be just fine. No, God wants to be the one where we go to for comfort and help in a time of need. People with escapism, they keep their emotions at a surface level. They are afraid. They are dissatisfied, so they're disconnected. So they are looking for something to make them feel connected. And your spouse will end up feeling emotionally abandoned and isolated. Man, it can look like sports. A lot of people throw themselves into hobbies and extracurricular things. Being a workaholic, constantly working so I don't have to sit and feel what's really going on. These people have a fear of conflict. The spouse feels neglected and alone, but yet very much married. But they sit by themselves and disconnected, and then they begin to get frustrated and resentful, and either them or the spouse begins to go online and try and get their needs met. Okay, let me get on Facebook and connect with somebody in high school that made me feel pretty, that made me feel cared for, because my husband sure isn't. Or, hey, this woman at the office, she praises me all the time, tells me how great I'm doing. And when I get home, all I'm told is take out the trash. You've been gone all day, and here's the baby. If we aren't careful and recognize what is happening, because we're communicating all the time. We're communicating. And if we don't have the emotional tools to cope, we will go to the wrong thing. It's incredibly important to understand that escapism thrives when vulnerability is avoided. What escapism is communicating is, I don't know how to feel emotion. And we're going to go into that. Number 3 idol that we need to tear down is personal independence. Personal independence. What is that communicating? It's saying, I'm afraid of losing my autonomy. In essence, I don't want to lose myself being married to you. But what we have to understand is that when we get married, the two lives become one. You are no longer two separate people. You are one flesh. And people that struggle with personal independence, they would get frustrated if they have to check in with their spouse. What do you mean I need to talk to you about where I'm going? I'm not your son. I'm not your child. I don't need to talk to you about when I'm playing golf or where I'm going. You should just know. When you get married, it is death to independent living. We are no longer just able to do whatever we want, whenever we want. People that struggle with personal independence would be people like Naaman. When he had to follow what the prophet said in order to get his healing, go dip 7 times in the Jordan. I don't want to dip 7 times in the Jordan. Do you want your healing or not? He wanted to do it his way. People that struggle with personal independence is about control. Absalom, personal independence. Here he was, his father was the king, and he tried to come in, usurp his father, and take the kingdom so he could do it his way, how he wants. There's an emotional detachment. Stay surface, avoid conflicts. And what happens in marriages where this is perpetuated is your spouse can feel like your roommate instead of your covenant partner. And we want to make sure that we pay attention to this because we don't want to discard our feelings. And here's another thing. People that are overly independent don't always pull their fair share in the house. They don't necessarily share the responsibilities because it's about how they want to do things and when they want to do things. And your spouse can feel unloved, uncared for, and like they come second. So we've got to tear that idol down. The fourth idol that we're going to talk about today is financial security. Now, I'm not talking about being a good steward here and being financially secure. I'm talking about an excessive focus on wealth or material possessions. Let me tell you what I mean by that. What this is communicating when we are operating, this is saying, I don't feel safe. I don't feel safe, I don't feel secure, and my money dictates my decisions and my priorities. I have a need to control the flow in and the flow out. This is where I get my value. This is where I get my comfort. This is where I get my security. You see, the rich young ruler did this. Jesus came to him and said, come follow me. And he was all about all the stuff and all of the things, and he could not let go. It is not wrong to have wealth. This is actually not about wealth. This is more about a poverty mentality. Doesn't matter how much money you have. This is a poverty spirit. And what happens, somebody that's got a poverty spirit will feel secure if they can go on and check all their balances. Oh, let me see how my stock's doing. And if they're doing really good, you feel good. It's like you got this dopamine hit. And your up or your down is based upon your account balances. Your security comes from your account balances. And people that do this can tend to prioritize their career over their spouse, or financial gain over emotional connection. They're overly ambitious for more. Money in the bank means I'm valuable, means I'm worth something. Now, I will tell you that the way that I grew up is, Pastor Troy grew up very poor and didn't have much. I grew up on the other side. My family had a lot of money, but not a lot of anything else. Not a lot of love, not any structure, not any health. And what you saw between Pastor Troy and I when we got married is you saw two different people with two very different ideas of money. He was like, I'm going to make $1 million by the time I'm 30, and he was all about investing and real estate. That's what he got his degree in. He was a financial planner. And here is me that had all the stuff growing up, and I would give it all away for a mother and a father that loved me, that took care of me, that were there for me. That never happened. But where this was an issue for me is that because I had a narcissistic mother, everything was used to control me, including money. So what I developed early on is, you won't control me. I am going to have my own money, my own things, my own stuff, and you won't do this to me. So even when I was a kid and I would get babysitting money, I would hide it and stash it. Hide it and stash it. And when things would be threatened, I'm thinking, yeah, you go ahead. I got my own stuff. You're not going to threaten me. So it put something in my head to make sure you're autonomous. Make sure you can stand on your own 2 feet. And I'm not talking about in a healthy way. So when Pastor Troy and I got married, the way that his family was is, if you got an extra $5, because they were very poor, oh my gosh, we never got to go to the movies. You're going to the movies, you're buying popcorn, and you're buying a slushie, and it would just be spent on experiential things. For me, what I would do is I would live with such a tight margin, because everything had to go into savings, because I needed that in case something were to go wrong. Because I grew up having to always watch my back, waiting for the other shoe to fall, because it always did. So you have two people that get married with completely different financial views. And here's the thing, this is not rooted in finances, it's rooted in attachment styles. That's why we gave you that week 1. This week, we're talking about how those attachment styles play out. And with me, this is what I would do in the early stages of our marriage, is I would take our checking account, I would whittle it down, remove everything, put it over into savings, and I would say, okay, until we get paid in 2 weeks, we're gonna live off $100 or $125 or $150. That is what I would do. He's like, how are we gonna do that? I'm like, no eating out, no movies, no this, no that. And he was like, man, he felt stifled. He's like, man, I grew up like this. Don't you be doing this to me. He felt controlled, rightly so, right? But I'm trying to feel safe. And I don't have my nest egg that I used to have. And until I get my nest egg, I'm not gonna feel safe. Do you see how this can play out in relationships? It's important that we understand this and we make financial decisions together as a couple. We don't have separate accounts, we have joint accounts. And let me just tell you this, I'm gonna throw this in for free. If you're wondering if this financial security piece could be you, let me just tell you a really easy way to tell. If you struggle to tithe by returning the 10% back to God that He said is already His in the first place, if you struggle to tithe, this is an issue for you. Tithing is Christianity 101. It is basic Christianity. Now, being an over and above giver, over that 10%, that is completely discretionary. And we can still find patterns, though, of, okay, well, I gave my 10% because that's required, but don't ask me for any more. Take a look. Let's take that idol down. Number 5, idol. This one hits me too. Perfectionism. What does that look like? It looks like expecting your spouse to live to unattainable standards. What does this say? I'm afraid of being judged. I'm afraid of being judged. That's what it's communicating. Not necessarily verbally, but that is what we are communicating. I don't want to be judged. It's like the Pharisees. Everything had to look good, be polished, there's an appearance, all of that. Let me tell you how this plays out with me. I will go back and I will tell you that when I had a conversation with my counselor, Pastor Troy and I, 23 years ago, started seeing a counselor when we started the church, because I was like, there's no way that we can be as healthy as we want to be and not have people that are constantly pouring into us as we are constantly pouring out. And so I said, let's make sure that we do what the Bible says, and we have the multitude of counselors. Now, my husband would tell you he thought counseling was weak and it was only for people that were damaged or weren't strong enough in their minds. That is a typical thing that a lot of men say. 90% of counseling happens because it's initiated by the woman. Because the man feels like, you're telling me I'm broken, you're telling me I need fixed. Well, let's change the way we say it. And if this will help you, because it helped my husband. I said, babe, if you want to get better in golf, what are you going to do? He's like, get a coach. If you want to get better in business, what are you going to do? Get a coach. Hey, let's get a coach. Hey, if you need to use the word coach, whatever it takes to get where you need to be, right? So I was talking with my coach. And I said, hey, I want you to help me with something. You know, the way I grew up, I had a narcissistic mother, and perfectionism was expected. If you even walked on the carpet after it had been vacuumed and there was a footprint, it was big trouble. And I grew up on pins and needles like that. And so in my marriage and in my life, in my leading of people, I said to my counselor, I said, help me know when I am operating in a spirit of excellence, because I very much believe if you put the name of Jesus on something, you better make sure that it is good, that it is excellent, that it is to a high standard. But how do I know when I've crossed the line? And he said something that was incredibly powerful, and I'll never forget. He said, well, give me the last time you got really frustrated because you felt like it was excellent, supposed to be excellent, and it didn't land the way you wanted. I said, oh, well, you know that we're in an elementary school, and we're setting up and tearing down every weekend. And this week when I came in, worship was starting, and I have told the worship team before, but back by the keyboards, there was a Dr. Pepper bottle and a little thing of snacks. There was a Mountain Dew by the bass player. There were like 3 water bottles over here by the drum cage, and then the bass player and the guitar, the lead guitar player, they all had bottles. They forgot to take them off of the platform, and I have told them 100 times. And he's like, you're right, that was not excellence. I said, no, thank you. Thank you for agreeing with me. How does that, people coming in for the first time and seeing that. And he said, so, let me ask you this question. How was worship that day for you? Well, what are you talking about? How was worship? Well, what do you mean, how was worship? It was terrible. It was awful. All I could think about was the Dr. Pepper bottles and the Mountain Dew bottles. How could worship be great when it was messed up? And he said, that right there is perfectionism. There was nothing you could do about the situation in the moment until the service was over, but yet you were unable to worship the God of the universe because something didn't go the way you wanted it to. Ouch, 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 ouch. It wasn't the expectation that was wrong. It was my inability to let it go when I realized I couldn't control the situation. All right, number six. The idol of other relationships. Ooh, go ahead, pull your toes back like this. Just pull them, come on. Practice pulling the toes back. Do the moonwalk, come on. Pull the toes back. The idol of other relationships. Marriage is your primary relationship, no other, period, the end. Does not matter if you have 5 kids. Marriage is your primary relationship before your children. So many times this can get off, particularly the more children that you have. What can easily happen is the husband can feel that all the affection and attention is going to the children, and he comes home, or you guys are together, and he feels like you've given it all out and there's nothing for him. Conversely, it can also look like you've got a lot of kids. The husband's feeling a heck of a lot of pressure to make sure that there is money in the account and food on the table. So he's working, thinking he's being a provider, but he comes home, he's emotionally checked out, and guess what happens? The wife feels like the job is the other woman. We've got to guard against this. There is no relationship on planet Earth that is more important than your husband-wife relationship. Kids come second. Let me also take it a step further. One of the reasons this happens is because we have not guarded our marriage bed. What can that look like? It can look like, little Susie is having a hard time sleeping, so she's in with mom and dad every night. Or little Susie wants to be held all night, wants to be rocked all night, and guess what? Well, it'd be a lot easier if we just bring her into our bed. Let me tell you what happens. The reason that makeup sex is so great is because once you fight and you argue and you realize you need to repair, it's that skin on skin. God made that as a way to repair our relationships. It's why holding someone's hand in a difficult time brings comfort. It is also why when a newborn baby is born, they immediately put them on your bare chest. It is that connection of skin on skin. Now, what happens when you take your baby or your little one and you constantly put them in the bed with you, and you and your spouse are already got a lot of kids, a lot of stuff's going on, work, and there's all these things, and you roll over, and instead of reaching and holding on to your spouse, you've got a little nugget in between you. And what we've got to do is set boundaries. This is your bed. This is mom and dad's bed. You go in your bed. Mom and dad are in our bed. And start your night off when you go to bed skin on skin. I'm not talking about sexually. That's next week, right? I'm talking about touching, holding, cuddling, feeling. You reattach every time your skin touches. When we have little nuggets all in our bed, I can guarantee you it is going to be a whole lot more difficult for you to connect in the way that you should. We love our kids, but here's the thing. If your marriage isn't where it needs to be, your kids are uncovered. The marriage bed comes before any other relationship. Are you hearing me? All right, it also comes before the in-laws. Let me tell you what the Bible says. It says, a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two of them shall become one flesh. You hearing me, Lake Norman? Good. South End? Good. Central? Good. You leave and you cleave. Let me tell you something, husbands. You should not be enmeshed with your mother. She should not be telling you how you should do things, when you should do things. That relationship is unhealthy if she is still involved in telling you how to do things. Husbands, understand. Your wife doesn't want your mom to be the other woman. She wants to be the woman. Women, you may have been daddy's little girl, but you're not daddy's little girl anymore. You belong to your husband. And daddy doesn't need to insert himself when things are going on. We keep the in-laws, or some of you might say outlaws, out of our marriage. If you need help, you go to your pastor, you bring it up in your life group, or you talk to your counselor. Let's keep things healthy. Now, the reason a lot of people, their parents still have weight in their marriage is because you're not financially independent. And I want to tell you, you need to cut the strings and you need to be financially independent. Your parents should not be sending money your way, should not be helping you cover your bills and pay your bills. That is not healthy. It is not godly. What we need to do is we need to be sufficient, and we need to understand that we stand on our own as a married couple, and our roots are going to go deep together. Don't do relationships with strings attached. Friendships. You shouldn't be hanging out with people that your spouse isn't also friends with. You shouldn't be hanging out with the whole drinking buddies that are all divorced, or the ladies that are all divorced and gossip about their exes. That is not going to help in your relationships. There should be no competing for time with friendships. You hearing me? Do you want me to try that again? You hearing me? There we go, there we go. All right, number 7, this idol. This idol is the idol of comfort and convenience. What is this idol saying? It's the saying, I'm avoiding discomfort because I don't want to grow. Why don't I want to grow? I fear failure. I am so afraid of failing. I keep myself, our relationships, my marriage small. I can't tell you how many conversations I have had with men in the past that would say, oh, I'm not a leader. Let me just tell you, I'd pack my bags up if I was dating you. If I was married to you, I'd be like, oh, yes, you are, and here's how we're going to do it. If you're not going to stand up, I'll stand up until you get your legs underneath of you. But if you are dating a man that says, I'm not a leader, let me tell you what he's actually saying is, I'm afraid to fail, and I've played it safe my whole life. It's the consummate nice guy. The one that would say, I'm just the peacekeeper. No. There is no such thing in the Bible about peacekeeping. The Bible talks about a peacemaker, not a peacekeeper. A peacekeeper is someone that is afraid of conflict. So let's get honest about this. People who go, oh, I'm content. I'm just content living where I'm at, doing what I'm doing with my job. I just want to be in my cubicle. I don't ever want to push myself. What they are saying is in my life, I learned how to hide in the shadows. And I stay small because I don't want to have to step up and really have to lean on the Lord to push in for what I feel are inadequacies. Let's get to the bottom of these coping mechanisms so our relationships can be where we need to, because we're communicating. When we aren't pushing our families forward, or when our husbands are trying to lead and we're just, no, I'm just the one that just takes care of the kids. No. We're not going to let you do that. You're called to stand alongside, and it looks different for different people. But we are called to be our husband's helper, not walk 10 paces behind. You hearing me today? And if you look at scripturally, the lazy servant, where Jesus gave talents to each person, and he didn't expect you to have the number of talents that one of the others had. He just said, I expect you to multiply what I've put into your hand. Sometimes we look at other people and say, I could never do what they do, and God isn't asking you to. What he's asking of you is, are you multiplying what has been put into your hand? We want to be multipliers, not maintainers. Now, let's talk about this for a second, because communication is so huge with our spouse that what it should be is, it should be a scalpel that is precise and healing. But if we're not careful, we can use it wrong, and it can become a sword that wounds or injures. So here's how Pastor Troy and I start our conversations now when we have some communication that needs to happen. Well, first off, I know not to catch him off guard. His tendency, as you learned last week, is to be an avoider. And my tendency is the anxious. So I'm going to bring everything, but I can't bring a fire hose. I've got to be a fountain that trickles out or he won't hear anything. So I set the time that I'm going to talk to him. Hey, Tuesday at 4 o'clock, can we talk? Now, I will say 4 to 4:20. The reason is he needs to know there's an out and it's not going to be a 4-hour emotional conversation or he will run for the hills. That's just a little trick, ladies, okay? He needs to know there's an ending and be faithful with the ending, right? But here's what these look like. If I want to talk to him about something, he will ask me, do you want me to hear you? Do you want me to help you? Or do you want me to hug you? Hear, help, or hug. 99% of the time, it is not to help. Because I've already got the solution. I just need a hug because I know what I got to do, and I need to feel your support, okay? Husbands, do you want me to hear you? Just listen. Do you want me to help you, give you what I think the solution is, or do you just want a hug? Hear, help, or hug. That'll save you a lot of things right there. Here's the issue. I'm going to wrap up and say this, okay? Here's the issue. The issue is that a lot of couples in relationships, there's one avoider. And when there's an avoider, what they would say is, I just need time to process. I need time to think. I feel like you're bombarding me right now. There is a difference between having time to process and overthinking, okay? Let me explain that to you. Many people will say, oh, I need to mull over it and think through it. Let me get back to you. And they can get back to you in like 2 or 3 days. What they are doing is overthinking is not about gaining clarity, which they will say to you. It's about trying to gain control. What does that look like? I'm going to analyze every detail. I'm going to replay the scenarios over and over. I'm going to search for every potential and possible outcome. And what happens is instead of actually trying to fix a situation, what we're trying to do is we're trying to show our superiority. Overthinking, let me say it like this, an overthinker is an underfeeler. And we can course correct that today. It's an attempt to control. And let me just tell you something. This is important to know. There is absolutely nothing that 2 healthy people can't work through. But I will also say this. There is absolutely nothing 2 unhealthy people can work through unless we are willing to move towards health. And that's what this series is all about. It's about moving towards health. Moving towards health. Would you stand up on your feet with me all across this auditorium, South End, Lake Norman? Stand on your feet. I want to say something. The goal is not about perfection. The goal is about progression. All of these things in your communicating will not be fixed overnight. They won't. But what you want to see is you want to see progress. And let me just say this out loud. This is a big statement I'm going to make, but I want you to hear me today. What I have found is most couples that have been mulling through and talking about a separation or talking about divorce, they're not talking about that because of things that have happened in the past. Because they're still with you. The reason they keep talking about that or bringing that up is because things right now in the present are not being worked through. What if you were willing to work through things, forgive the past, but work through things that you are dealing with as a couple right now? Resolving the issues. Things that you have been unwilling to address. What if we did that today? Today. Your campus pastors are going to come up right now. And what I want us to do is I want us to address the things that we've been avoiding and ignoring in relationships today.